over the next few minutes or so. We're hoping to not keep you for more than 20 to 30 minutes. This is a really casual sit-down conversation with myself and Kyle, who I will let intro himself in a second. But essentially, this is to talk through the Milo's implementation of the Thrive all-in-one learning platform. Kyle, for anyone who doesn't know Milo's or yourself, can you give us a quick introduction, what the business is, what it stands for, and a bit about your role there as well?
Yeah, thanks, Danny. So my name is Kyle Dismukes. I work at Milo's Tea Company. Milo's is a beverage manufacturing company. We produce tea and lemonade and other flavored all-natural beverages. It's a family-owned and operated business. It's also a woman-owned and operated business. We just hit our 80th year anniversary this year, so big celebrations happening on our end. But the business as a whole, we focus on a lot of continuous learning and development. And, we really pride ourselves on being a people first company, and really making sure that our people have the capabilities or the tools to succeed and grow within the business. I'm a learning business partner here at Milo's, and I really help the business in supporting with like the learning systems, associate development programs, as well as any of the Milo specific created content, and then our partner content curation.
Perfect. 80th year anniversary is some achievement for a family-run organisation. And I can also testify that the Milo's tea is very good. I was out in the US last year and this year at some conferences, and the Milo's tea definitely kept me going with the energy on the Thrive stand. So if anybody hasn't tried it, I would highly, highly recommend. And hot off the press from Kyle, there's some new flavours coming out soon, so keep your eye out for those as well. Thanks, that was useful. Just for anybody, obviously, who's joined this session. In terms of where Milo's were with learning and development before you started looking at a new learning platform, Kyle, what was the day-to-day reality at that point?
Yeah, so our day to day, Milo's puts a lot of effort and resources into learning and development, kind of as stated before. And, we were utilizing an LMS to facilitate like our score and package content, our homebrew content, that type of thing. And we're trying to focus more on that skill development, moving into more of a skills driven organization. So, we needed more out of our system, and our day to day reality with our system was it was a little bit too complicated to manage. It was a bit limiting, and what we can do to support all of those training needs and programs. So it just didn't really provide us a lot of automation options, and honestly very much data for us to see like are we making an impact, are people actually growing or developing those skills. So it just didn't really give us a lot to work with.
Yeah, the ROI and impact part, it comes up, as you can probably imagine, a lot across conversations that we're having. If you can't show back to the business, the ROI and impact that something's having, it's hard for you to keep hold of that solution, tech, tool, whatever it might be that you've got. So you then decided to go out to procurement for a replacement learning platform. What triggered that decision? We've probably touched on it a little bit there around like ROI, data, that kind of thing. But what really triggered the decision to go out to market? Was there a specific moment or pain point that made essentially what you currently had no longer viable?
Yeah, I mean, I think the real main pain point for us is we just didn't know if our efforts were being successful. Are we making that impact? Talked about the ROI, and we had a lot of really large ideas of what we wanted to do with an LMS system and what we could do to leverage or elevate what we're currently doing with our programs, and our system just wasn't meeting those needs. For us to evolve and grow and support our folks, we really needed a system that could do that. And the complexity of making changes and the confusing nature of our current system really made it difficult for us to train new members, our team, on how to facilitate running like the admin tasks and everything. So it just became harder and harder for us to manage, and we needed something that was more automated, had a lot more up-to-date skills and features, features for us to really support our folks appropriately. And that's ultimately what led to, hey, we need a new system. And I think we'll get to it here in a minute, but we went through a pretty lengthy evaluation process, and I think it was the right move for us ultimately.
Yeah. And on that, actually, was this the first time you'd gone through this procurement process for a new piece of tech or tool across Milo's, or had you done this before and you kind of knew what that process looked like?
As far as an LMS, this is the first time I had gone through that procurement piece. We'd used a few different systems previously, but I was never really part of the conversation in that one. So I'm getting to really own and be a big piece in the evaluation and vetting process for this system was pretty awesome for me, at least.
Yeah, perfect. And okay, so you've decided you're going out to market, you've gone to procurement to understand kind of what that looks like. How did you then approach that evaluation process? What did that actually look like? And who was it involved in essentially making the decision?
Yeah, like I mentioned, I was part of that vetting and evaluation team. As far as the other folks that were part of that process was, my manager of learning, my director of learning, and then that final decision making piece being with our executive. But we went through a pretty lengthy evaluation process. I created a pretty detailed rubric. I think all of the main data points that we made our decision on, we had like 17 different main ones, and then probably another dozen sub like micro sections for that rubric. But the rubric itself covered a lot of different features. AI automations, reporting features, which we kind of already talked about. But then also like what customization the system had to offer, and then all the other different ways that it could align and elevate our current programs. And I think by the end of it, we probably evaluated like 24 plus systems to narrow it down over, a 6 month period. So, you know, some of it, some of those features I just couldn't live without, and narrowing it down got a lot easier. But it was a pretty lengthy process. Danny and I think we talked for quite a while during that process as well. Um, we developed quite a friendship over that time, and it was a long 6 months, but I think it was definitely worth it.
Yeah, I don't think I could name 24 different LMS systems. So the fact that you evaluated 24 is some achievement. And I know Kyle quite well now, and I know how organized he is. So I know exactly how he's done that with lots of spreadsheets and lots of hours in there as well. And I think you mentioned there was some like functionality that were non-negotiable on your list. What kind of non-negotiables did you have, and did those change at all as you got deeper into kind of conversations and demos of systems as well?
Yeah, honestly, for us, the non-negotiables were, deep reporting features, those AI features for kind of custom curating content for end users, and then like skill development support, and really just being able to make the experience for our end users a lot more enjoyable. Because we want to generate that buy-in, so that was really important. As a learning team, we put a lot of time and effort into ensuring the experience for our end users is pretty impactful and relevant. So I think that really struck true with us. And then I think the real major must-have, which is probably going to be a lot of people's must-have, is that deep data integration with our HRIS system. We wanted the systems data to be leveraged appropriately within whatever solution that we went with. We really needed it to marry well with whatever system we went with. And, I think that just led us to being able to automate a lot more processes like onboarding and leadership development programs. And then, our skill and development for our growth within the organization. So, I think those were our big ones. I think as we started looking at more and more systems, and I went to a lot of demos. It didn't really change our focus, but I will say the bar kept on kind of getting risen or elevated more because there's so many great options out there, and so many companies are doing so many great things that I think it was easy for us to keep pushing that bar up and up of like, well, this is possible. Why would we accept less? And I think, especially like when we started looking at Thrive, that bar kept on getting a little higher and higher because it's like, well, Thrive can do this. Like, what other systems can do this? And it started that list of 24 plus started getting a lot smaller.
Yeah, and I think one thing that stuck out from the process that I went through with you was you had your non-negotiables, you had your nice to have, so which are great to have kind of on paper and in an Excel document. I think the really powerful thing that sometimes teams can miss off in the evaluation process is understanding how is that going to impact you as an organization? Like, where is the actual value? What are the business objectives and how are they going to help you achieve those as well? That's one thing that stuck out from me. And also, when you're evaluating 24 plus platforms, I imagine you're going to see functionality that you didn't even know existed. So that then starts to form part of that functionality, use cases, business cases that you need to then measure against. So I definitely enjoyed the process with the Milo's team, because sometimes, I mean, I've seen RFPs and I've seen evaluation processes where they actually have functionality on there that
Yeah.
they then label as we don't need. So all of a sudden, like, we don't even need to evaluate through that. So yeah, it was quite a rigorous
Well, I
process, I
think
would
to
say.
that point too, at least for us, we didn't want to talk ourselves into a system that was going to make our lives harder. The
Yeah.
whole point of updating your system or getting a newer, flashier, well teched out system is you want to make your life easier for your learning team or your organization. And if you're ever like, oh well, we can live with this being a harder process, I don't think that's where we want it to be. Again, that made that process a lot easier for us. It's like, well, I don't want to have to work harder here where to work less here. I want the full package.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And what do you see? Obviously, like we said, you've reviewed lots of different systems at that point. What did you see in Thrive that you didn't see elsewhere, or you might have seen elsewhere, but what ultimately kind of tipped the decision in favor of you then looking to implement Thrive?
I think culture comes to mind first and foremost. We have a very unique culture at Milo's, and I think Thrive has very much the same culture that we do. You have a continuous growth mindset. Y'all are constantly implementing new features and upgraded features. So like that was a really big win for us because we want to continuously be evolving in what we can offer. And then I think how simple and intuitive the system is as well. We're a manufacturing company, so the easier, the more simple we can make it to get people into the system and get them engaged, and then surprise them with the depth and the features on the second half of things. I think that really helps us as a learning team to kind of generate that buy-in. And then honestly, the customer service at Thrive was just top notch. Out of all the companies I talked to, um, there was never I got to wait weeks to get a response or anything like that. Anytime we had a conversation about what the system can and cannot do, you guys were very transparent and what's possible, and always followed up with support documents outlining what the capabilities are, how we can ultimately do things. And I think that was a big decision maker for us.
Shout out to Shane on the support documents. I know Shane
Yeah.
supported us quite heavily throughout the tech calls with Kyle. So that's good to understand. Just good to know kind of where different systems differentiate themselves. So you've gone through that evaluation process. You selected Thrive as your preferred vendor, and we now move into that kind of implementation journey and the start of that journey as the partnership. So let's talk implementation to begin with. What were your expectations going into that implementation process, and how did the reality compare?
Yeah, honestly, based on our conversations in that buying or acquisition phase, really helped lead into that implementation piece because we had been through all the ins and outs of what to expect, and all of the communication was great. So myself being the lead on that implementation going in, I felt really confident because the scope of work was well outlined, the timelines were well outlined. Everything seemed very you know, I don't know, clear or easy to handle. But yeah, I mean, building and implementing a new system is always an undertaking. So having that clear timeline and expectation of what's going to happen, it's really helpful. I've been through a few different implementations before that were. I'm not going to say they weren't easy, but they were definitely a lot more difficult than what we experienced with Thrive. The reality is everything with our implementation went better than expected. It was fantastic. The implementation team went above and beyond for our needs, and we had fantastic partners to kind of coach us through the best ways to utilize the system. What process we should go through to make the work easier. So yeah, I'm very very happy with what we did, and honestly, we finished early. I think we planned for a 6-month implementation. We got it done in 4. And it
Nice. Yeah.
allowed us to pilot the system with a small group internally to kind of help ease that change management piece. And it really took a lot of headache out of that initial launch because we kind of got to work through the bugs before we launched. And I'm not saying there was a lot of them, but yeah, it was a great time. Shout out to Neve in Georgia. I love working with them. They were fantastic. So sad I don't get to work with them anymore. But
I'm sure even George will be listening and have a smile on the face for that. And it's good to know that obviously you actually went live ahead of schedule, which is always good because, like you say, it allows you to almost launch a bit of a pilot and a soft launch out to the business before that kind of big bang switch on across the organization. And obviously, I've mentioned this before, yourself and the team at Milo's are super organized, which goes a long way in terms of actually hitting any timelines or being ahead of schedule with that because yeah, we're not afraid to outline where we actually need some of your resource. Like, yes, Thrive will do as much as we can to get that platform up and running the way that you want it. But there are elements where we're going to need your support and parts that you need to do as well. So definitely a team effort across that one. And were there any moments that surprised you, either whether it's a challenge that you hadn't anticipated or things that actually went smoother than expected? I imagine the timeline is one that went a bit smoother than you probably expected.
yeah, absolutely. As far as surprises are to take into account, everything went a lot smoother than I thought it was going to. Like I said, I've done a few others before, so any challenges that popped up, we were quickly able to come up with a way forward and you know get to working on it. I think the beauty of implementing with Thrive, it was kind of a work at your own pace.
Yeah.
Y'all outlined what you needed and how fast we were able to get through any of our pieces and get over any hurdles that kind of helped with that pacing piece, which was nice for me because I'm like, oh, I want to get everything done now and get everything out of the way. But yeah, again, going back to the strategic conversations with our implementation partners, it wasn't a surprise because I'd kind of already gotten the overhaul of it going through that acquisition phase. But it was just very refreshing to have a company that was so well organized. We're talking about how well organized we were. It was kind of a two-way street. I think it played off of each other well, and that Thrive was very organized as well, so it made it a lot easier on me to be. All right, I'm just going to copy and paste all of my things into this, and use that structure, and made everything a lot easier. But I mean, I would say the one hangup that we had that was I would say a challenge is our user provisioning data, and even then, I think it only took us an extra week to get it all done because we had a few hiccups, but we were able to sort it all out pretty quickly and get all that put into place.
Yeah, I was going to ask then because I think one of the when it comes to implementation, a big misconception or fear from L&D teams, IT teams, is the amount of work and time that goes into integrations. Now, obviously, there you've mentioned there were some slight hiccups when it comes to user provisioning, but can you tell us a little bit more about what you've integrated with and how you found that process?
Yeah, we only had three large integrations. Obviously, the one that most companies would probably do who care about their security is like that single sign-on integration, which honestly was connecting a person on our side and a person on Thrive side, and then they got it all squared away within like a couple of days. So that was, I was like, well, that was probably one of the biggest things that I was worried about. So I'm glad that went well. And then obviously our largest integration being that user data from our HRIS system, and pulling that into Thrive because obviously that's very important to how the entirety of the system kind of works and functions, and you know creating a smooth experience for our end users. So integrating, we use Workday, integrating with Workday, not all of the data points fully meshed up with what like the out of the box solution from Thrive had to offer. But the beauty of that is we did a custom integration, got all of our data points in, got them all kind of married together and working just fine. And I think that's honestly why it took us a little bit longer is, we had that more of a custom integration and we had to make sure everything was good. So there's a lot of data validating and making sure things were talking and updating appropriately. So everything beyond that was pretty easy. And then the last one that we had was our content library from our provider. Unfortunately, they don't directly integrate with Thrive, which we were a little sad about because we love that feature. But Thrive was great at giving me all the documents and the frameworks to plug and play all the information. So it was as easy as just getting all of our SCORM files, all of the metadata, and all of the thumbnails to Thrive. And then I want to say like 1 or 2 weeks later, we started seeing our content pop up. And the beauty with that was, there's a great like metadata framework that y'all have that made it easy for us to kind of set what our topics and skills are. Because again, being very skill conscious for our skill development, we wanted to make sure that all of those content pieces had the depth of skills that they needed to.
Nice. Yeah, took a little bit longer, but still went live early.
Yeah,
Is the big
exactly.
thing.
Which again, going to that smoothness of the integration is,
Yeah.
and I think when we did our last integration, it took me months of building out interface builders, enterprise interface builders, and stuff like that to get all that content in there. And this seemed such a light lift that it was probably one of the more enjoyable pieces because I didn't have to stress about it. So
Good. Okay, so you haven't been live that long with Thrive. You did a bit of a soft launch in February and then a full launch in March time. So you haven't been live too long. What, in that short space of time, what's landed well with your people across the business so far? What are you most pleased with in terms of adoption or engagement or potentially something else as well?
yeah, I think the user experience is what we've seen land the best so far. With the pilot and the initial launch, that was the biggest feedback that we heard was it's so much easier to use. The flow and how intuitive the system is just so much better than what we were using before. That I think instead of it being that scary thing that people see when you change systems, like, oh, I have to relearn a whole new system, is it was so easy that it was one of those, well, this isn't that bad. And I feel like the engagement piece kind of has gone up because of that, because it's such an easy system to use, and the features are really easy and well laid out. So yeah, I think other than that, Kiki, the AI companion within Thrive, was also a huge hit. We didn't really have that in our system before, and it's even evolved since we've launched in March, and the new features are also drumming up some excitement as well. So yeah, I think for us, those are like the big pieces that landed really well. And then as far as engagement, like I said, getting all that positive feedback on the system features and all of the ease of use is really exciting for us, because then we can start implementing more complicated things, because with easier system to use, you have more availability and flexibility. And then yeah, spaces have been a big hit as well. We're building out a lot of
Nice.
spaces that launched right as we were kind of launching as well. So we got to launch with spaces, which has been good. We run a few different leadership programs through spaces, so it's been a nice social feature that we've gotten to add into the offerings.
Yeah, Spaces is a really nice community-led way of doing things like that. And also, have you renamed Kiki? For anyone on the call, by the way, you can rename Kiki what you like, or you can keep it named as Kiki. We've got some weird and wonderful names across our customer base.
No, we really liked Kiki. We thought it sounded fun, and it was like, you know what, we're gonna keep Kiki the way she is, and just have it as like a fun little helpful companion. I don't know if we'll change it down the road or not, but for right now, she's gonna stay Kiki.
Nice. She's evolving as well at the moment,
Yeah.
which is exciting. Lots of new things to come there. And if you were talking to another L&D leader, Kyle, at a similar company or a completely different company, just starting their platform search, which I imagine somebody on this webinar might be at the moment, what would be the one thing you would tell them to prioritize?
Honestly, that evaluation piece. Don't skimp on the evaluation. Make sure you do your due diligence. Really outline what you as a company or organization need. Kind of. I put ours in a couple different buckets. Our have to have, nice to have, and then kind of just cool features that were kind of surprises. So I would definitely go through and make sure you bucket out those items. They're very important. And then yeah, just review as many systems as you have time for, and then reevaluate all of your current programs or ownerships or systems, because you never know what might be easier to facilitate in a new system. And I think, yeah, at the end of the day, like I said before, is you want a new system to help you or take a load off, not create more work. I think, yeah, it'll be more work on the front end, but the automations that an actual LXP or LMS system brings, really takes a huge load off of your team.
Yeah. I think automation is a key part in that, and something that we see
Absolutely.
coming up a lot. And I think it's easy to say, oh, they've got AI, must automate lots of things with us. But actually, throughout that evaluation process, really digging deep, like, does whatever AI solutions a provider's brought into the platform actually help? Does it make my life easier? Does it make a learner's life easier? Does it make us more efficient? Does it take more admin away from us? Is quite key, and not just taking it at face value. So yeah, really good.
Absolutely.
And then what are you? We've got a couple more questions, literally two more, and then we'll close off. I think we're pretty good for being in that 20 to 30 minute mark. What are you most excited about, Kyle, in terms of building on the platform over the next 12 months? Whether it's something, a piece of functionality that you've not quite switched on just yet, or something that you know is in the roadmap and coming.
Yeah, I think the biggest roadmap item that we have for this year is just spotlighting more features within the system. We kind of did a slow rollout of the features and just kind of introduced all the core features and how to interact with them to get people in the system and get them excited. So we'll be doing some kind of spotlight of other different features within the system that will kind of add depth to what's offered. And then beyond that, we do content spotlights as well. Focusing on, how can we continuously get people back into the system, not just be a one stop and, oh yeah, this is cool, and then move on. Like, how can we continuously get them to be engaged in the system? So my team's working real hard on getting those new spotlight content campaigns kind of built out, and same thing with like the spaces, creating more spaces to generate more engagement.
Yeah, it's an interesting one with that not launching with absolutely everything switched on. And we see it a lot where organizations are either implementing their first platform or they're moving across from a more traditional LMS previously, all the way through to other organizations who just go big bang, everything switched on all at once. It depends on the culture of the organization, how your learners are going to respond to all of that as well. So that's really useful. And then finally, more of a reflective one for you, Kyle. If you could send a voice note back to yourself on day one of that procurement journey, what would you say to yourself?
Yeah, I think don't second guess yourself. Keep asking questions. Yeah, there's no such thing as too much data. So, obviously this is a big decision and could greatly impact, your organization. So having the data behind the decision you make and then fighting for that decision, I think goes a long way. And then just keep connecting with people. I've met so many great L&D professionals through this process that it's great making those connections. This industry is so full of great people who all have the same goals in mind, and surrounding yourselves with other professionals that are eager to support, answer questions, that just love doing what they do. That's great for the L&D space as a whole, but also generates a lot more opportunities like today, where I can kind of come and share some of my experience, and hopefully that it helps somebody, and supporting their organization and do something that's game changing or impactful for them. So
Yeah, 100%. I think expanding and using that network is a really, really good piece of advice. Ask the people who have done it before, ask them for their recommendations of who they've used, who they like using, what they did throughout that process, I think
what
is
they did wrong
really, really,
too.
yeah, what they did wrong, yeah, what didn't work well, who they didn't like. So yeah, I think that's a really good piece of advice. I'm sure that well, hopefully there's lots of people who've joined this webinar and taken even just a little bit of nugget of insight and information away from you, Kyle. So thank you for joining us. We really appreciate your time that you've taken just to outline that process, not necessarily just about obviously Thrive, but that process in general for anybody else who's looking to go through that. I'm sure you would encourage people to connect with you and message you if they've got any questions off the back of this. Feel free to ask anything in the comments and we will come back to you as best we can as well. Thanks everyone for joining. Kyle, one last thanks to you for joining us as well. And yeah,
Happy to do
enjoy
it.
the rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks everyone.